some of these things when we did Athens, Paul being in Athens and Corinth. But I just kind of want you to be aware of these things because we will see quite a bit of early Christian stuff in a couple of museums. So the Rizk Museum has early Christian materials. The Boda Museum, one of those museums in Berlin on Museum Island, is all early Christian Byzantine kind of stuff. Okay, one of the things, and you don't need to know all of these details, I spiked some of this from other classes' PowerPoints. When we try to understand early Christianity, our view of it is a little subjective, because it's almost all from the Christian's point of view. We have very few records that tell us exactly what the Romans thought, etc. Now, of course, for those of us who are practicing Christians, which I think is all of us, we are largely shaped by what the New Testament says. But the New Testament is not a comprehensive record. I mean, we have letters that happen to survive from some of the apostles. You can only imagine if we had had a general handbook of instructions or something for Peter or something, rather than just a couple of letters. Then we have information from later Christians. One of the things I put down here, although it's not highlighted, is we tend to really have our understanding of early Christianity, and Rome for that matter, deformed by Hollywood, the way things are portrayed. I don't know if you've noticed this. Whether it be Ben-Hur with a Jew or whether it be the Road with a Christian, the Christians and Jews are always played by American actors. Okay? Whereas the Romans are always British actors. It's this subtle way of having the Romans be the other. Okay, and so they're just kind of dangerous and scary and not very trustworthy. The Romans really had no idea who the Christians were. Remember, Rome was a big place and the Christians were a very small group. In fact, for a long time they thought they were just another group of Jews. There are so many different kinds of Jews, Sadducees, Pharisees, etc. Now, as you know from your review sheet and your quiz, our understanding of Christ is shaped by the Gospels, of course. A little hesitant to call them biographies because they don't actually treat much of Jesus' life. Matthew, Luke talk about conception and birth. Luke has one story from his childhood. Otherwise, we have selected episodes from his 3-year ministry. The only thing the Gospels really focus on in any detail is the last week of his life, which we just, of course, celebrated last week. Jerusalem church, this all came from Dr. Stratton's chapter in the book. Kind of goes through phases. You start out in Jerusalem, it's a very Jewish group. Then we start to scatter a little bit, and we start to see Gentiles, and then the last half of Acts, of course, chronicles the missions of the Apostle Paul as he takes Christianity to Turkey, Greece, and later to Italy. So Acts 1 through 7 is primarily about the church under the leadership of the apostles Peter and John. John's brother James having been killed quite early. But even before he's killed, it's always Peter and John who are like going and preaching in the temple and stuff. So I always kind of felt bad for James, like he got left out. It's always bad to be the missionary threesome. Those of us who've been in missions, how many of you were in threesomes? Never good. Never good. There's always one person who's out. Okay, and hopefully it's not you. Yeah, it is rough. So anyway, I feel bad for James. But this James is the half-brother of Jesus, and he actually is leading the church in Jerusalem long after Peter's left. The church is primarily composed of Jewish Christians in that time period. Then the next 5 chapters of Acts, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, talk about how after one figure, a very famous figure, Stephen, who became the first martyr, this is the guy who preached and was stoned to death, that the Christians in Jerusalem were kind of scattered, particularly those who were Greek-speaking. And so they went, and that was good. You know, the Lord has this great ability to bring good out of bad. And so when the Christians were scattered, they took the gospel with them, and so it actually ended up extending the missionary work. A guy named Philip who went to Samaria and Gaza. Peter went to Caesarea. That I should have bolded that so you can see that I actually highlighted that. That was the big city on the coast, and that's where he baptized Cornelius, etc. This little graphic just shows you how the church expanded in the book of Acts. It looks like it's geographic, which it is, but it is also ethnic. So you start out with Jerusalem and Judea, so we're Jews. Then the Samaritans are the next group of people, and then we start to go to the Gentiles. Just real quickly, since we will be going to Athens, Paul served dozens of missions. When we talk about the first, second, third missionary journey, I always, in Religion 12, make my students qualify first, second, third Gentile missions, because he had been preaching quite a bit before he went to Turkey on this first mission. And we're not too concerned about this one, because we're unfortunately not going to Turkey. We would have if Brother Erdogan had been having a lot of political fun there. But this is the one you really ought to be familiar with. So between 49 and 52, he left from Antioch and he went through Turkey, visited some of the churches he'd done in his first Gentile mission, went to northern Greece, and of course went to Athens and Corinth. And so these are the things we're going to talk about while we're in Greece. So he gives the speech of the unknown God at Mars Hill, and of course, as I mentioned in our reading quiz, he's in Corinth for 18 months. The third missionary journey, once again, the details of this ministry don't really affect us, except at the end of it, he's arrested in Jerusalem and sent to Rome. When we go to Rome, we're going to see the place where he was killed, we're going to see the place where he was buried, and so that will be interesting when he goes to Rome. Sometime around 60, these details don't need to concern you. There's some discussion as to whether he actually dies at the end of Acts when he goes to Rome, or whether he may have been released, served a few more missions, and then was killed later. So we don't actually know the dates of his execution. Some people say 63, some people say 67. Real quickly, in the period after the apostles, there was a real question: who can determine what's doctrine? Who can determine what's scripture? How should the church be run? From an LDS perspective, we would call this the apostasy. To be a kinder, gentler group and not tell people they're apostate, I usually call it just the post-apostolic period. Okay, it's the period after the apostles. For Latter-day Saints, that means no authority. For other people, it means we're just moving to the Catholic or Orthodox period. So I think that's a nicer way to talk about that, rather than call it the apostasy. So that was the question there. The apostolic fathers were leaders and teachers who had known the apostles. Apparently, Jake studied too hard and was ready to start listing them there. So good on you, Jake. Okay.
Sorry, on the offset,
How many one?
John and Peter, what is that? So it's not like
So these are the apostles whom they knew. Oh, is that why you got that wrong? So Antioch, Ignatius knew John, Polycarp knew John, Clement was ordained by Peter. So these are the apostles whom they knew. Is that why in your quiz you put those names?
Okay.
Give her an extra half point, Jen.
Give me some
Okay. And we've talked about this, most of this with the reading quiz. I just want you to be aware that this issue of persecutions, because we're going to be in the catacombs and look at Christians who were hiding and look at Christians who died in the early generations. And our understanding of the Roman-Christian relations, once again, is deformed by one-sided sources, but also by a little bit of melodrama. It's always excited. We're going to go to the amphitheater, the Flavian amphitheater, and say, oh, Christians were thrown to lions here. It's easy to focus on the dramatic stuff. But the reality is most Christians actually got by in their lives day to day without any serious opposition. Okay. So as I say here, we have this uneven record of persecution. We're going to talk about Nero while we're in Rome. The city burned in 64. He wasn't a very popular emperor, and so he was always looking for people to blame things on. And so he blamed it on the Christians, and then we talked about Trajan. We probably won't have much of an opportunity to talk about Diocletian. Diocletian actually didn't rule in Rome. It was a period of time in Rome's history when the emperors were always fighting wars on the frontiers. So Diocletian actually moved the emperors. He had 4 emperors in his time period, divided the job in 4, because there were so many wars going on. He needed 4 commanders. But he was the one who launched the last, most serious persecution. And shortly after that, an emperor named Constantine actually said, you know what, Christians, part of the Roman Empire, let's kind of try to unite. Rome's really struggling right now. And so he made Christianity a legal religion. In fact, the story is when he was fighting in a civil war against another Roman would-be emperor, the night before the battle, he had a dream which said, under this sign conquer. Some people, one source said it was the cross. The other one actually said it was the key rho. He is RCH, rho is our R, and so this is the first letters of the name Christos, or Christ. So the key rho is actually the monogram of Christ. You don't need to know this, but this is kind of fun. Constantine actually, until about a week before he died, worshipped the sun, not Christ. And the symbol of the unconquered sun, Sol Invictus, was the sunburst. His soldiers already had on their shields this. And so all they had to do the next day to bring Christians in was just put a little head on that one, and then it becomes that. So Constantine was very much a political operator. For those of you studying poli-sci, you kind of understand how this works. But he just was trying to find the Christians who were a big group at this time period, and he thought rather than persecuting them, let's bring them in. So one of the things you ought to be aware of is, although he made Christianity a legal religion, it is not true that he made it the official religion of the Roman Empire. Now, that doesn't happen too much later from a man named Theodosius. Enough of that. What we will actually see more of than early Christian things, because the early Christians didn't leave a lot of art, is we will see a fair number of Byzantine things when we are in the museums. So as I mentioned, they're Greek-speaking Christian Romans. And just a few things to know about the Eastern Roman Empire. Constantine, who made Christianity a legal religion, moved the capital from Rome to a new city in the east that he called his city, Constantine's city. That's where the name Constantinople comes from. It is now currently the largest city in Turkey, called Istanbul today. But Constantinople was what it was originally. If you read the chapter on the Byzantine period by yours truly in the book, the things I stressed there were continuity and change. The Byzantines, until 1453, that's how long the Byzantine Empire lasted. The empire in the West, the Western Roman Empire, fell in 476. So the Middle Ages begins shortly after that. 1453 is very close to what other famous date in the 1400s? In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean. Less than 40 years before Columbus, there were people in Constantinople who were calling themselves Romans. And that's really kind of shocking. They still consider themselves Romans. They had a Roman legal code, Roman kind of structure to their government, but a lot of changes had happened. They were, as we mentioned, speaking Greek. They were Christians, not Roman Catholic like they are in Western Europe, but what we call Greek Orthodox. When we go to the monastery at Hosius Lucas in Greece, you'll see how different Eastern Orthodoxy is from Roman Catholicism, because it was increasingly Orientalized or Easternized. Justinian was the only name I had you learn. This is because he was the most famous emperor. He was actually the last one to speak Latin. Very, very devout Christian. Reconquered a lot of the west part of the empire that had fallen to Germans and other people. But we know him mostly because he is the one who ushered in this great period of architecture and culture. One of the things that almost always characterizes a Greek Orthodox church is a dome. Now it's true you have St. Peter's Basilica that has a dome, or St. Paul's in London that has a dome, but that wasn't the tradition in the West. In the West, you think of a Gothic cathedral or Romanesque church, but the Eastern churches always had a dome. They were usually, instead of cross-shaped church, they were usually what we call a centrally planned church, where everything just kind of looked into that central area where the dome was. We are going to see lots and lots of mosaics. What's a mosaic? Pictures made out of tiny little stones called tesserae. So you have colored glass or gems that are used to make pictures. In their poorer periods, they would use frescoes, which is painting on wet plaster, so you get the same kind of effect. So this was the empire under Brother Justinian. This is what he inherited. This is what he reconquered. This is where Constantinople is, by the way. If Turkey had not been off limits, our trip would have been 24 days rather than 20. And the plan was to go to Ephesus, which is a site where Paul and John were, in a great Roman and Greek city. And you can't go to Turkey and not go to Istanbul. So there's no reason to be sad about it. It is what it is. You got Munich, okay, but I mean, that was the original plan. Okay. Anyway, this poor empire was attacked on all sides. The Arabs took over this. Slavic tribes like the Serbs and the Bulgarians came from that side. And eventually it was nothing but the city of Constantinople, which the Turks took in 1453, and no more Eastern Empire. This is the biggest, until St. Peter's was built in Rome, this was the biggest Christian church in the world. It's called Hagia Sophia, which in Greek means holy wisdom. And it's a very different structure. The minarets, by the way, weren't there. Of course, it was a church. The Turks later turned it into a mosque. This is my hotel. I was there some years. I got stuck in Istanbul. My flight was canceled. I got stuck there for a few extra days. Yeah. Anyway, this is the Hagia Sophia. But Hosius Lucas, although it's like 1/20th of the size, will still give you the same kind of experience. Hosius Lucas is the monastery of St. Luke that we're going to see. So it's really quite cool Byzantine stuff. Look how big it is. See, this is me, I'm tiny. This is me. Yeah, so this is where we're going. Okay, so this is Hosius Lucas. You can see how it's kind of a Hagia Sophia image, if you will. And And this is what we meant by mosaics. Okay. Almost every dome and arch surface in the Byzantine church or an Orthodox church will be covered by mosaics or frescoes, so it's really quite exciting. This is just for your post-Easter discussion. Poor Thomas got his face rubbed out.
Was that purposeful? Because I know that like in the Hagia Sophia, they did the.
Well, the Turks took out the faces there, but here we have everyone else's faces. I think this is just kind of an anti-Thomas thing. Okay, good enough. Well, let's do what is proven to be the more fun part of these lectures, which is talk about the city we're going to. And so let's talk about what's often called Città Eterna. Who speaks Italian here? Città means the eternal city. Okay, so that's Rome. Okay, so if you happen to, I know I haven't been discussing this, so you may not have it bringing it. If you happen to have your map, you have your metro on the side. It's not a bad metro system, it just needs a couple more lines. As we're going to see in a moment when we get to the real thing, there's a whole part of town that we will need to get to, which isn't there. It's actually here. We're going to have to walk all the way up to Spanias. I'm going to add something that first day. We're going to the Spanish Steps, if you've ever heard of that. Yeah, well, it's because it's where the metro station is, and I can't get you home unless we go to the Spanish Steps. So we're going to plan that evening out really carefully. So that's going to be the Ara Pacus, Mausoleum of Augustus, Pantheon group pick, Trevi Fountain, get some gelato, and then we'll walk to the Spanish Steps so we can all get back to the hotel together. So